Let's talk about the bow. But let's do something simple. I have a pencil here. And, the thing is that for some reason you don't have a bow handy, but the pencil is basically sort of similar to the bow as far as holding the position. So when I was first studying the violin, when I was 5, my teacher was of Russian background, and the bow grip that she taught me was a Russian bow grip, which was like that. Like some of the fingers were kind of together, and the wrist was up. So I'll show it to you with a bow. So like this, like that. That's the way I would play it. Now, this, when you think about that particular bow grip, pretty good bow grip used by some nice fiddle players like Jascha Heifetz, Misha Elman, Nathan Milstein, and so on. So that was the Russian bow grip. The bow grip, the accent, the beauty of that bow grip was that they used a lot of bow speed in the bow grip, so that if they wanted to play something, they would go, So all right, so that's the way I was brought up. And then that was about the first 8 years when I was studying the violin in Israel. And when I arrived in the United States, my teachers, both Ivan Galamian and Dorothy DeLay, taught with a different bow grip. And that bow grip was, instead of that. So what you do is that you want to make sure that there are spaces between the index finger, second finger, third finger, fourth finger. The spaces should be fairly even. Some people go like that. That's bad, because you want to make sure that everything here is relaxed. And so that bow speed, it gives you, shall we say, it accentuates the pressure of the bow. And it's not just relying on bow speed, but so that particular grip, I recommend. Now, the other thing about that grip that's very important is where the second finger is opposite the thumb. So as you can see, the thumb and the second finger are across from each other. See? So you can also do it, if you're going on a train and you're not particularly feel like opening the violin case, you can do it with a pencil. So it goes like that, and there is your index, your second finger and your thumb across from each other. Now, very important that the thumb should be slightly rounded. A lot of kids play like that, where the thumb is flat like that. See, instead of like that. So it's like this one or that way. I always like it to be rounded, so that there's always like a little, almost that you can see a little circle between the second finger and the thumb, because it just gives the hand a little more freedom. The minute you go like that, there's always a intensity that you don't want. So that's more or less the Franco-Belgium. Make sure that the pinky finger relaxes, that it doesn't go like that. Sometimes I do that, and people say, "Oh, you do that? Why do you do that?" I say, "Don't do what I do." I say to them, "Don't do what I do." If I go like this, that's my kind of way. But the important way is just go like that. See how that looks, see how that feels, and that's it. So that's the grip. Now, of course, here we go with the wrist. All right, so the wrist should be not stiff. So in other words, you want to make sure that there is a little bit of play in the wrist. I'm not saying it should be like that, but it's got to be a little bit of play in the wrist. Because if there's no play in the wrist, you're basically losing an important joint in your arm, which helps sustain the bow. So just make sure that you don't feel like there is what do you call it? If you have when you break something, they put you in a cast. You don't want to feel that there is a cast here over your wrist. The wrist has to be slightly, but I'm talking about slightly flexible, so that when you change the bows, you see how the fingers basically play a little bit, they move. See, I don't do this. You don't want that, because that's immediately makes it stiff, and then you lose control of what you want to do with the bow, which I will tell you later as to where you put the bow. So, but the grip is the first important thing. Now, how do I make a sound? Well, wait a couple of years and then you'll make a sound. But how do you, so obviously, when you first practice, you start practicing with scales, All right, so every time that you change from an up bow to a down bow, there is a slight thing that we call pronation. There's a slight movement. So from up, I'm exaggerating so that you see what I'm talking about. Okay. There are several elements that are important in producing a good sound in the bow. So the first element is, and it's not necessarily in the same order. Once, let's say that you basically have the grip and so on, is where the bow is between the fingerboard, which is here, and the bridge, which is here. Right? So that area called the point of contact. So let's put it this way. If you are too close to the bridge, you'll have a scratch. If you're too far, if you're too close to the fingerboard, the area where you want the bow to be is right about here. So that it's not too close to here and not too close to here. And obviously, as you get to be more advanced, you get to know what makes you feel more comfortable. But the areas there, it should feel like, I always like to make an analogy, if you jump on a mattress, and if the mattress is too soft, you just go down to the mattress. If it's too hard, that's difficult to jump. But if it's just right, it's like a trampoline, you have that nice comfort zone. It's like not those of you who play tennis, for example, it's similar to when you have a tennis racket and you hit the ball on a sweet spot. The minute you hit the ball on the sweet spot, it's easier to control, it's easier to have a spin, and so on and so forth. If you hit the ball too close to the rim of the racket, it's not as good. It's the same thing here. The sweet spot of the violin, of the strings, are between the bridge and the fingerboard. You have to try it, and when it doesn't feel comfortable, there's always a reason. And I always tell my students, if something doesn't feel comfortable, if you feel, oh, Mr. P, we're scratching, like this, I say to them, look where your bow is. And then they're like, oh my goodness, it's right here. That's nice. it was a little bit too close. Obviously, the ideal thing to do is to actually feel without looking as to where your bow is. But that, you learn from experience and so on. So, all right. So the first thing, as we talked about, is the point of contact. That's the first thing about making the bow make a good sound of the bow. The second thing, again, not necessarily in that order, is the amount of speed, the bow speed. So, if you go like that, or if you go, depending on how much speed there is. The third thing is the direction of the bow. So basically, ideally, because we are not robots, I would say that I would play the down bow, and the direction of the bow would be parallel to the bridge and parallel to the fingerboard, to the end of the fingerboard. But that's not possible. So what you want to do is that when you play a down bow, you want to make sure that the bow slightly turns a little out, slightly, and then you have a little resistance in the string. And then when you reach the tip, you want to turn it around and put it back in. Like that. So basically, what we're talking about is if you take a pencil and a paper and make a narrow, long figure 8. So if you do that, let me see. I don't know if let me see. Maybe, can I use it? Can I use your Beethoven? I'll make a little figure 8, but don't worry. You can erase it. You see, it's like a very narrow figure 8. It goes down and goes up and goes up and goes down. It's like so basically what it is that you go out on the down bow, make a little pivot, and go up, and that's out. That's in. So down bow is out, up bow is in. That's basically, so down, out, up, in. Now, make sure that some people take it so literally that they go, so why isn't that sounding? It's because don't take it literally. Just take it so that it catches. If you look at the hair of the bow under a microscope, you'll see little hairs that's sticking out, and those are the things, especially when you put rosin on the bow, that helps grab the sound. So that's why it's better. It grabs the sound better when you slightly convert the direction of the bow slightly out, and then you go in, and then you go to the frog. Frog is in, and then on the up bow, and then out like that. Frog, by the way, that's the frog. It's not an animal. It's a little. There's no frog in this. That's the name of the bow. It's like frog. So you get to the frog, you go a little in, and then out. And the fourth thing is the amount of pressure that you play. So, and that adds up to the speed of the bow. So if you have, let's say, a very fast bow, you can add more pressure. If you have a slow bow, you cannot put as much pressure as you did, because then you'll scratch. So if you have a fast bow, you go. Like that. However, if you want to play slower bow, you have to decrease the amount of pressure. Otherwise, it'll sound like this. It'll sound like that. So, but the minute you add the speed, so it's a question of ratio. How much pressure, how much bow speed? So, to summarize it, you've got the point of contact, which is between the bridge and the fingerboard. That means where you put the bow, how much speed you use in the bow, And that combined with how much pressure you use. So, as I said before, the pressure with bow speed, the more pressure you can use, the less speed you have to adjust the pressure. And then, of course, is the direction of the bow, is the direction. So ideally, you basically want to play parallel because you can't really be so, what you don't want to do is you don't want to play like this, like that, because the bow's not going to grab. So you want to go a bit like this on the down bow and a little bit like this on the up bow. And of course, that's combined with the bow grip. And of course, the thing that I have not even began to mention is what part of your arm are you supposed to use so that you will sound good. So in other words, as I mentioned before, to make sure that the wrist is not stiff, you also want to make sure that the elbow works nicely, that the elbow doesn't go like that, that it's stiff with the shoulder. You want to make sure that your shoulder is relaxed and that the elbow is independent. And then you can have much more control of everything. The minute you stiffen the wrist and you stiffen the elbow and it comes from the shoulder, not much control. So look what happens. You see, because you cannot really control your point of contact. But if you go, you can stay right here, and that's where you get the good sound. I believe that the sound that you produce should always have a core of the sound. So when I'm talking about a core, and I'm talking about, so if I go, so that the core can be in piano and the core can be in forte. It's always a core. So now I can, if I wanted to play fortissimo, I would probably have to move the bow slightly away from the bridge, otherwise I will get a scratch. So if I go, I can't do that. But if it's piano, I can do it. So the answer to the question whether you change the point of contact, probably you vary it. But you don't. I don't believe that if there's some people when they play pianissimo, they want to play it next to the fingerboard. And there are theories that some people think that's the way to do it. I don't think so. I think that you can actually produce a soft sound and still play right here. And sort of pause. Because for me, there's too much air. My old teacher used to say, it sounds like there's sand there. I don't want sand. I want, you see, I always, whenever I teach, I like to compare the sound to food, I mean, like I like to compare it to, so I don't want, for example, a sound that sounds like yogurt. I want the sound to sound like ice cream, like vanilla ice cream, like something, or like fudge that has a viscosity to it. I don't want it to have air in it. Some people feel that's not the case, when you play something, when you play Mozart or when you play something that's Debussy or something French, you want to have it air. I think that you can produce a good sound by the amount of bow speed that you use and the amount of pressure that you use. But still, the sound should have a middle. It should have a core to the sound, that it's like a cable, that inside there is a core. There's always a core, no matter what. When you play in a concert hall and you have acoustics to deal with, the sound should travel. And when the sound travels is when there is a core there. It does. And then you have all of these people coming backstage and saying, "Oh my goodness, what violin do you play? And it reminds me of this story of, there's a very, very famous story of Heifetz, that he played a concert, and afterwards a lady came backstage and says, "Oh, Mr. Heifetz, your violin sounded absolutely wonderful tonight." And he picked up the violin and he put his ear and he says, "That's funny, I don't hear anything." So anyway, so but the thing is that the minute it sounds good, the instrument produces better. It produces more and it carries better.